They say cops are supposed to have thick skin. After 20 years on the force, I thought I had armor thicker than a tank. Turns out all it takes to pierce it is one stupid text message. Working late again, don't wait up, XOXO, Martia. The words flashed across my phone screen at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the kind of time when nobody should be sending excuses about late nights. I read it once, twice, 3 times, like maybe the meaning would change if I stared hard enough. It didn't. My name's Detective Eddie Kovatch, 42 years breathing, 20 years serving, and apparently a lifetime of being played for a fool. The badge on my chest suddenly felt heavier than it had that morning, as if it carried not just the weight of authority, but the humiliation of a man whose wife couldn't be bothered to lie convincingly. The precinct was buzzing around me, phones ringing, typewriters clacking, rookie uniforms, moving papers like ants, carrying crumbs. But all I could hear was that text echoing inside my skull, working late again. At 2 in the goddamn afternoon. You look like someone pissed in your cornflakes. The voice yanked me back. Frank Russo, my partner, slid into the chair across from my desk. Russo had the subtlety of a brick through a stained glass window and about twice the charm. Big guy, bigger mouth. He cracked his knuckles like he was prepping for a boxing match instead of a homicide case. "What's eating you?" he asked, his grin sharp but his eyes curious. "Nothing a decent divorce lawyer couldn't fix," I muttered. My thumb scrolled through Marta's Instagram feed. Pictures of her and her sister Victoria at some overpriced restaurant, both of them dressed to kill. Glasses of wine, plates of food with names longer than my case reports, all filtered with that fake golden glow Instagram loves. They looked like they were auditioning for husbands, not celebrating marriages. Russo leaned back, his chair creaking like an old ship weathering another storm. Trouble in paradise? Paradise? I barked out a laugh, but there was no humor in it. More like purgatory with better furniture. Marta's been pulling these mysterious disappearances for months. Girls' trips, yoga retreats, work conferences. Hell, yesterday she told me she had a book club meeting. Russo smirked. So what? Women like book clubs. I shook my head. Marta hasn't read a book since college, unless you count the instruction manual for her new BMW. Before Russo could fire back, the desk phone rang, shrill and impatient. My hand hovered over it, but I didn't answer. Instead, I stared at the framed photo of Marta and me from our honeymoon, Rome, 17 years ago. She had that radiant smile, the one that used to knock the wind out of me. Now all it did was remind me of everything I'd lost and maybe never really had. Russo grabbed the phone for me. Kovatch's desk. He listened, nodded, then tossed the receiver down like it was hot. "Another domestic out in Westwood. Uniforms can handle it. Don't worry about it." I rubbed my temples. Feels like the only domestics I'm dealing with these days are my own. Russo leaned forward. His voice dropped, softer now. "Listen, Eddie, don't go looking for problems where there ain't any. You know how at Island, you stare at shadows long enough, you'll convince yourself there's a monster hiding in every corner. But there was a monster. I could feel it, crawling under my skin. That text wasn't just an excuse, it was a confession. Not in words, maybe, but in tone, in timing, in the way Marta's voice sounded in my head as I read it. You don't send kisses and hugs at 2 in the afternoon unless you're trying to butter someone up, and my gut told me she wasn't buttering me. That night, I drove home later than usual. The house looked the same as always, 2-story colonial, white paint chipping, porch light flickering like it needed new wiring, but inside, the silence was different, heavy. Her BMW wasn't in the driveway. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon and sat in the living room, lights off, just watching the shadows stretch across the ceiling. My phone buzzed again around 10. Another text. "Sorry, running late. Love you. Love you." The words felt hollow, like she'd pulled them out of a drawer, dusted them off, and tossed them in my direction because it's what I expected. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But belief is a luxury cops don't get. We live on evidence. And the evidence was stacking against her. I finished the bourbon, poured another, and stared out the window at the dark street. Somewhere out there, Marta was lying. And I had a choice. Be the husband who ignored it, or the detective who investigated it. Trouble was, I didn't know which one would hurt more. The next morning, the precinct smelled the same as it always did. Coffee, old paper, and the faint tang of desperation. but I couldn't breathe it in without tasting the metallic bitterness of doubt. Marta's text messages were still burned into my retinas, but now a new fire had started, the fire of suspicion. I pored over her calendar from the past 3 months. Girls' trips, work conferences, yoga retreats, book clubs, wine tastings, charity galas, and every single event came with a story so carefully crafted that it almost looked innocent. Almost. I began with the first missing day, March 14th. Marta claimed she was going to a spa retreat in the suburbs with Victoria. I called the spa discreetly. Closed. Renovations. Sorry, Miss Eddie Kovatch? The receptionist asked. Never heard of her. I double-checked. Credit card statement? No charge for the spa. No record of booking. Just a debit for brunch in some overpriced cafe in the city. But she had told me she'd be out of town all day. March 2020. Work conference in Westwood. I pulled the conference itinerary online. I called the registration desk. They confirmed attendance lists. No. Eddie Kovatch. My chest tightened. I felt that familiar squeeze in my gut, the one cops call intuition, civilians call paranoia. Then came April 7th, the book club meeting. I should have laughed, but I didn't. Instead, I drove by the cafe she'd claimed it was in. The lights were off, and the door was padlocked. The city was quiet, but the questions weren't. See something, Kovatch? Russo's voice broke my trance. He leaned against my desk, arms crossed, eyebrows raised. He was holding a half-eaten bagel, crumbs on his tie. I see a pattern, I muttered, flipping through the printed copies of her social media posts. Each image was carefully staged. Wine, glasses, flowers, perfectly angled selfies. But the locations, the timestamps, the people in the background, they didn't add up. Victoria was there, yes, but something was off. Her smile looked forced, rehearsed. Russo shrugged. Maybe she's just being social. You ever think of that? Social? I snapped. Or secretive? You tell me the difference when someone's hiding 6 hours of their day. Russo held up his hands, backing off. Fine, Sherlock, but you can't tell your spouse like she's a suspect without it coming back on you. I don't care. I spun my chair toward the wall, scanning the photos again. Not anymore. By midweek, I was living in 2 worlds. The one at the precinct where I was Detective Eddie Kovatch, 20 years of law enforcement under my belt, and the one at home where I was just Eddie, the husband being lied to by the woman he loved. Each world bled into the other, making it impossible to separate work from personal life. That night, I started digging deeper. Her phone records, her GPS location, anything. Thanks to a few favors from tech-savvy friends at the department, I was able to access anonymized pings from her phone. Her book club meeting wasn't at a cafe. It was somewhere in a commercial district, near a strip of warehouses I'd seen during narcotics surveillance a few months back. My pulse quickened. I followed her the next evening. Dusk settled over the city like a heavy velvet curtain. Marta drove her BMW with the precision of someone who does this too often. She parked near the warehouses, glanced around, then disappeared inside. I parked a block away, the engine off, breathing shallow. I watched as figures moved behind the grimy windows. Men and women, some I didn't recognize, some familiar faces from the precinct's old files. Boxes were being loaded and unloaded. I squinted. The fluorescent lights flickered, throwing shadows that looked like a dance of secrets. Marta was inside, smiling, talking, gesturing. I couldn't hear the words, but the tone of her body language spoke volumes. Authority, command, secrecy. Russo would have said I was crazy, but the badge doesn't lie. Instincts don't lie. Something was going on, and it wasn't a yoga retreat. I returned home at 2 in the morning, staring at the empty driveway. Her BMW was gone again. My bourbon didn't touch my tongue. I had no appetite for food, no patience for small talk. I spent hours scrolling through her social media, noting inconsistencies, trying to find a thread I could pull. Then came the Instagram post that broke me. A photo of her and Victoria, identical bracelets on their wrists. She captioned it, "Sister love is forever, family first." But the location tag? A different city. The timestamp? An hour when she was supposed to be at the yoga retreat. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Evidence was mounting. Each innocent story was a lie. And every lie carried its own weight. I realized, for the first time in years, that I was not just investigating a suspect, I was investigating my own marriage. I called Russo. I need eyes on her tomorrow. Full surveillance. I don't care how, just get it done. Eddie, you're taking this too far, he said. No, I'm just being thorough, I replied, though my voice was tight. I didn't tell him it was personal. That it had been personal for months. That every smile, every I love you, every late night text was a puzzle piece I didn't want to admit was missing. The next day, I watched her leave for work. The BMW glinted in the morning Sunday, but the route she took, the detours, the stops, they didn't match her claims. Each turn, each pause, each street she drove past whispered a single truth. She was hiding something, and I was determined to find out what it was. By the end of that week, I had a list of every trip, every event, every suspicious moment. I knew her habits, her fake smiles, her carefully curated photos. I even knew the rhythm of her footsteps on the hardwood floors at home. I could almost predict when she'd be late. And I was terrified, not just of what I might find, but of the realization that the person I trusted most in the world might not exist in the way I thought she did. When I finally sat down Friday night, alone, the walls of my house seemed to close in. I wasn't just a detective investigating a case anymore. I was a man chasing a ghost in a life that had been carefully constructed to fool him. Every text, every photo, every excuse she had been writing a story, and I was only beginning to read between the lines. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her, not yet. Not until I had every piece of the puzzle. Because if Marta was guilty of something bigger than a lie, I needed proof. Solid evidence. The kind that could indict, the kind that could destroy, the kind that could leave nothing to chance. For the first time in 20 years, I realized that being a detective didn't protect me from betrayal. It only made me painfully aware of it. And Marta? Marta was a suspect. I couldn't sleep that night. The shadows in the bedroom seemed alive, stretching across the walls like fingers, whispering reminders of every lie, every omission, every carefully staged Instagram post Marta had sent. I tried to drown it out with bourbon, but the burn only made the taste of betrayal sharper. The next morning, the precinct was a blur of fluorescent lights and ringing phones. Detective Eddie Kovatch, 20 years on the force, 42 years breathing, and now, officially, a man teetering on the edge of obsession. I slouched at my desk, staring at my screen, trying to ignore the small voice in my head, saying, "Follow her." Russo leaned over, chewing a donut like it was going to solve all the world's problems. "You're on edge," he said. "What's the matter? Did your coffee go bad?" "I'm not on edge," I muttered, but my voice betrayed me. "Just thinking." Russo snorted, sliding into the chair across from me. "Yeah, thinking. About your wife again, I bet. Look, I get it. You've got the best seat in the house to watch her lies unravel. But you ever consider that maybe you're seeing things that aren't there?" "I've seen plenty," I said, the words sharper than intended. I've seen her leave for a yoga retreat that didn't exist, watched her Instagram photos place her in cities she never visited, and seen her credit card statements contradict every story she's told me in the past 3 months. That's not imagination, Russo. That's evidence. Russo leaned back, arms folded, expression serious for once. "And you're planning to tail her? Don't." I froze. The word echoed like a gunshot in my skull. "Don't." "Excuse me?" I asked, leaning forward. "Don't go looking for problems in your own marriage," Russo said, his voice low. "I've seen it too many times. Cops turn spouses into suspects, partners into adversaries. You'll lose perspective, Eddie, and worse, you'll lose yourself." I swallowed hard. The warning hit harder than I expected, but the pull was irresistible. I couldn't stop now. Not after seeing the inconsistencies, not after feeling the first sharp pangs of betrayal. By noon, I had gathered my tools. Binoculars, camera with long lens, notebook, the usual detective stuff. But this was personal now. This wasn't a homicide case or a stolen car. This was my life, my marriage, my trust, and I intended to follow it to the end. I parked 2 blocks from Marta's apartment. She left at exactly 1:47 p.m., BMW glinting in the Sunday. She waved at a neighbor, smiled as if the world was oblivious to the web she had spun around me. My heart thumped not with love, but with something darker. Suspicion, anger, fear. The streets blurred past as I followed her. She turned left, then right, then left again, taking routes that made no sense if she were going to the office she claimed to work at. Each turn felt deliberate, designed to throw off any observer. I kept my distance. Every detective instinct in me screamed to close the gap, confront her, demand the truth. But another paraprofessional, calculating, told me patience was my only ally. She pulled into a parking lot behind an unmarked warehouse, the kind of place I knew too well. Shadows in the windows, heavy doors, surveillance cameras that were probably not connected to anything legal. She exited the car, checked her phone, and disappeared inside. My pulse quickened. Boxes were being moved, people coming and going. I crouched behind a dumpster, notebook in hand, jotting down license plates, counting the number of people entering and exiting. Her presence there alone meant she was hiding something, and my gut told me it wasn't a simple affair. Russo called my phone. "Where are you?" "Watching her," I said. "Eddie, you're crossing a line. You're the detective here, not a jealous husband. Don't let this get personal. You'll screw the case, and worse, yourself." "I can't stop," I admitted. "Not now." "You're obsessed," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Do me a favor, step back, take a breath, or I swear you'll burn yourself out before you find the truth." I hung up, hands shaking. Maybe he was right. But when I saw Marta laughing inside that warehouse, surrounded by people I didn't know, something in me snapped. Obsession wasn't just a choice anymore, it was a necessity. Hours passed. I documented every movement, every gesture, every shadow in that building. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, only that when I found it, the truth would hit like a sledgehammer. Night fell. Marta left the warehouse, BMW headlights cutting through the darkness. I followed again, careful not to be seen. She stopped at a downtown hotel, greeted a man I didn't recognize, then disappeared inside. My notebook was filling fast. License plates, timestamps, observations, each entry was a piece of a puzzle, a map I didn't fully understand yet. Returning home, I felt the crushing weight of the badge on my chest. For 20 years, it had represented law, justice, and protection. Now, it represented betrayal and personal failure. I poured bourbon again, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, too quiet, except for the ghost of a laugh that belonged to a woman I barely recognized. I couldn't tell anyone at the precinct, not Russo, not anyone. Personal cases are dangerous. They cloud judgment, blur the line between love and law, between instinct and obsession, but I also couldn't stop. For the first time in my life, I understood the double life of a detective. 1 foot in duty, 1 foot in suspicion, and a heart trapped somewhere in between. Marta was no longer my wife in the way I remembered her. She was a suspect. And until I knew why, until I knew the truth, I was going to follow her every move. The next day promised another layer of the mystery. A web of lies and half-truths that, if untangled, could destroy everything we had built. And I was ready to pull on the first thread. I didn't sleep again that night. Not from worry, not from bourbon, not from the restless weight of my own thoughts. The shadows of the house seemed to whisper secrets I wasn't ready to hear. And yet, I couldn't ignore them. Marta wasn't just lying. She was hiding something bigger, something dangerous. By morning, I had convinced myself that I had no choice. My life had become an investigation, and investigations require patience, diligence, and courage or madness. Probably a little of all three. Russo noticed my quiet demeanor as soon as I arrived at the precinct. "You look like a man who's been possessed by insomnia and tequila," he said. He tossed me a coffee cup, black, no sugar. "You really going to keep this up, Eddie? Following your wife around like a second-rate private investigator?" I ignored him, scanning the morning reports, the small crime updates that now felt trivial compared to the storm brewing in my own home. "Nothing second-rate about it," I muttered. "I'm gathering evidence." Russo snorted, but I could tell he was worried. "Yeah, well, hope this ends with you alive and your marriage in one piece. Otherwise, I'm billing you for therapy." I didn't answer. He was right, in a way. But danger had a smell, and I could smell it now, like smoke before a fire. By mid-morning, I had my next plan. Marta's credit card records, GPS pings, and her social media activity all pointed toward a warehouse district downtown, same area she had been spotted in the previous week, but this time, the pattern was clearer. She was meeting people I didn't recognize, people who didn't belong in polite society, or at least not in the world I thought she belonged to. I parked a block away from the warehouse, binoculars and notebook at the ready. The street was quiet, the sun bouncing off the concrete walls, highlighting the graffiti and rust. The kind of place I knew from past surveillance operations. Industrial, abandoned looking, perfect for things you didn't want the authorities to see. Marta arrived in her BMW, glancing around casually, then slipped inside. I waited and waited. Minutes later, men and women started arriving. Some carried boxes, others moved pallets of goods. The fluorescent lights flickered, creating the illusion of movement and shadows dancing on the walls. Marta moved among them like a general inspecting troops, giving orders, checking manifests, overseeing operations. I scribbled every detail into my notebook, every face, every movement, every subtle gesture, and then I noticed something that made my chest tighten. There were crates with markings I recognized, items seized in past narcotics raids linked to people I had put behind bars. Marta's hands weren't just organizing shipments, she was directing them. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. She wasn't having an affair. She was running something bigger, something criminal. I tried to steady my hands as I jotted down the license plates of vehicles, noting every arrival and departure. My mind raced. If she was involved in this, it wasn't a small-time scam. This was organized, professional, and dangerous. Back at home, I couldn't sleep. My eyes flicked to the bedroom door, to the silence that had become too loud. I poured bourbon, paced, made calls discreetly. Old contacts from the precinct whispered answers. I couldn't easily get anywhere else. Background checks, connections, anything that could link the warehouse activity to a larger network. Hours passed, and the puzzle began to form. Marta and Victoria weren't just hiding vacations and book clubs, they were laundering money, moving goods, and associating with people I had investigated for years. I could trace patterns of transactions, shipments, and contacts, all converging on this warehouse, this operation, and my wife, my Marta, was at the center of it. The following night, I returned to the warehouse district. Marta arrived alone, moving with the same grace and confidence I'd seen before. I parked 2 blocks away, waited, and then followed her as she slipped inside. Inside, the operation was in full swing. Men with tattoos I recognized from previous gang investigations moved boxes while Marta coordinated. Papers were signed, phones exchanged, and she spoke quietly but firmly, her authority unquestioned. I observed quietly, snapping pictures, taking notes, and then I saw the man she had met previously at the hotel. Tall, dark hair, sharp eyes. He exchanged a brief nod with Marta and then disappeared into the back room. My instincts screamed danger. This wasn't just laundering. This was a criminal enterprise. I needed to know more, but I couldn't risk being caught. So I waited, patient, meticulous, watching shadows stretch across the floor, watching secrets unfold in the light of fluorescent lamps. Later, at the precinct, I cross-referenced the faces, the trucks, the shipment manifests. Everything pointed to a single conclusion. Marta and Victoria were central figures in an organized operation I had only seen fragments of before. Drugs, money, potentially stolen property, it was all there, hidden in plain sight. Russo stopped by my desk. "You're glowing. What's the excitement? Did you crack the case?" I looked at him, dead serious. "It's bigger than a case. It's my marriage. Marta isn't just lying about trips, she's hiding an entire criminal network, and I'm in the middle of it." Russo's eyes widened. "You're saying, your wife?" "Yes," I whispered. "The woman I married, the woman I loved. She's running something illegal, and I've got to prove it before it gets out of hand." He sat down heavily. "Eddie, you know you're playing with fire. This isn't domestic surveillance anymore. This is criminal investigation against your spouse. If you get caught, it's your badge, your career, your life." "I know," I said, "but I can't walk away. I can't pretend I don't see it. This is bigger than us now, bigger than betrayal. This is life and death." Russo shook his head. "Be careful. For once in your life, listen to me." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I had to know. I had to see it all. The woman I had loved for 17 years, the mother of my children, was hiding a truth darker than anything I had investigated in my entire career. That night, I followed Marta again, photographing her, documenting every move, every handshake, every transaction. Each detail added another layer to the picture I was building. And as I watched her disappear into the shadows, I realized something terrifying. I might be the only one in the world who knew the truth about her. The woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by a shadow, a ghost running an empire built on secrecy, lies, and crime. And I had a choice: confront her now and risk everything, or continue watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike to reveal the truth. I chose to watch, because in the shadows, the truth always waits. The weeks that followed were a blur of surveillance, late nights, and bourbon that no longer burned, it just went down like liquid dread. Marta's routines were predictable, meticulously so, but each observation made the weight of betrayal heavier. Every lie, every detour, every stolen glance at me convinced me she was a stranger wearing the mask of the woman I loved. Russo had stopped arguing. Even he could see I was past reasoning. "You're going to burn out," he muttered one afternoon as I leaned over my notebook, recording every license plate, every shipment, every whispered conversation from behind the dumpster outside her apartment. "And if you get caught in this, Eddie, there's no backing out." "I don't care," I said. Not entirely true. I cared more than I should, but letting it go was impossible. The threads of deceit had wound around my life too tightly. I had to see the end of this. That night, I tailed Marta one last time. She drove with purpose, BMW glinting under the streetlights, the engine's purr somehow more sinister than comforting. The warehouse she entered was familiar now, its shadows like old friends. But the air felt heavier, different. Inside, I crouched in the darkness, notebook open, hands trembling slightly. Marta moved with authority, her gestures sharp, decisive. The man I had seen before, the one I still didn't know, approached, and she spoke, not loudly, not theatrically, but with a precision that left no doubt. She was the one in charge. I snapped photos, scribbled notes. Every interaction confirmed what I had feared. Marta wasn't just hiding. She was running this, orchestrating every shipment, every meeting, every shadow transaction. My mind raced. How had I married someone capable of this? How had I missed the signs for 17 years? I followed her back home, parked 2 blocks away, watching her disappear inside. Silence fell like a shroud over the neighborhood. I waited, heart hammering, debating my next move. Confront her, call Russo and have backup, or wait for her to slip again? I chose confrontation. The front door clicked behind me as I entered the house, shoes silent on the hardwood floors. Marta appeared in the living room, holding a glass of wine. She smiled, casually, as if the last month of my surveillance hadn't existed. "Eddie," she said, voice soft, eyes warm. "You're home early." "Cut the act," I said, voice low, sharp. "I know what you've been doing." Her smile faltered, but only slightly. "I don't know what you mean," she said, tilting her head, eyes wide. "Don't play dumb. I've been following you, watching you. I know about the warehouses, the shipments, Victoria, the lies, every trip, every book club, every girls' weekend, all of it." She set her wine glass down carefully, fingers brushing the stem. She didn't deny it. She didn't shout. She didn't even cry. She just stared at me. Silence stretched between us, thicker than anything I had ever felt. Finally, she spoke. Not with words, but with her eyes. Calm. Unflinching. Almost proud. I swallowed hard. "Why?" I asked. The word trembled, almost lost in the quiet. Why all of this? Why lie to me? Why betray me? She didn't answer. Her gaze held mine, unwavering, silent. And in that silence, the truth screamed louder than any confession could. She had been living another life, one I had no access to, one I had no control over, and one that didn't include me the way I thought it did. I felt the weight of the badge in my pocket, heavy and meaningless. 20 years of serving the law, enforcing justice, and protecting the innocent, it hadn't prepared me for this. The crime scene of my own marriage stretched out before me, and I was both detective and victim, investigator and suspect, hunter and prey. I looked at her, this woman I'd loved, the mother of my children, the architect of secrets, and I realized something terrifying. Love didn't matter here. Evidence did. Proof did. Truth did. And in that moment, I had to choose between the man I was and the man I had become. I pulled out my phone, dialed Russo. "I need backup," I said. Voice, steady, controlled. "At my house. Now." Russo's exasperated voice came through. "You serious, Eddie?" "Yes," I said. "I'm serious. It's not just about us anymore. It's criminal, and it's coming out tonight." I hung up, turned back to Marta. She didn't move, didn't flinch. Her silence was louder than any scream. I reached for the divorce papers I had drafted weeks ago, long before I knew the full extent of her operation. I placed them on the coffee table. Not a word, not a fight, just the quiet gravity of finality. She looked at the papers. Then she looked at me. And then, nothing. No denial. No justification. Only the calm, steady stare of a woman who had already won in ways I couldn't see. I understood then. The confessions I had been chasing weren't going to come in words, they would come in actions, in choices, in the evidence I had collected over weeks of surveillance, photographs, GPS records, financial trails. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The truth was right there, silent, damning, inescapable. The sirens came first, distant, then louder. Russo arrived, followed by 2 uniformed officers. I stepped back, hands raised. Marta didn't resist. She didn't argue. She simply allowed the law to close in, her composure unshaken. I watched, heart heavy, as the woman I loved was taken away. Not in a scream, not in a confession, but in silence. A mute testament to everything she had hidden. And as the night closed in, I realized something I couldn't ignore. Sometimes, even the most experienced detective cannot solve the case of the heart. Sometimes, even with proof in hand, you lose the person you thought you knew. I poured myself another bourbon, staring out the window at the flashing lights, listening to the quiet that finally settled in my house. My badge was heavier than ever, my heart heavier still. The woman I married had confessed in the only way that mattered without words. And now, all that was left was the aftermath.